Hey, welcome everybody. Jon Clay, VP of Threat Intelligence here at Trend Micro, and welcome to episode 32 of Trend Talks BizSec. Joining me today again is my colleague, Greg Young, VP of Cybersecurity at Trend Micro. Greg, what's going on today?
It's been a busy weekend for security news. It's been quite a bit. The business of security news. So I know you and I have, in the last hour, talked a lot about what's been going on at Microsoft on the weekend and what that means about the business of security, right? How does that relate to that? So
Yeah, I think it'll be an interesting topic because, obviously Trend Micro here, we're a software vendor. We've been creating software for 35 years now, and we have a lot of technical debt ourselves, like some of these other vendors. But one of the interesting areas, Greg, I was at RSA not too long ago, and Trend Micro signed the CISA's Security by Design, Secure by Design pledge.
right,
So as a vendor, software vendor, Microsoft signed it. A lot of the Palo Alto, a lot of the big vendors were in attendance there, signing this agreement, this pledge, so to speak, to be better and do better. So I think let's talk a little bit about this. You and I have been in the software industries for quite a long time, but what are your thoughts around it? Just initial thoughts on it.
yeah. There's a few laws of physics we have in security that remain true, even though we keep trying to flat earth them. And one of them is that infrastructure companies, when they do security, the infrastructure will always win out, right? And they're essentially two companies, always. Never fails. They always become two companies to do that because they're competing businesses, right? And security is
Right.
typically the smaller slice of the pie, always. And these are always separate business units. They're never combined. That the security products, the security services are almost never offered. There's probably an exception I haven't thought of, but it always works out that way. So it's internally frustrating for these companies because the security folks always wear it whenever there's a vulnerability, and vulnerability is already bad news. But I think when they're done by design, when you do insecurity by design or make bad decisions or have you know score 10 severities, yeah, it's not a surprise, especially when security people would probably not make those decisions.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that play out right now with this whole thing with recall with Microsoft, right? I think that feature that's coming in their AI Copilot plus AI PCs, they wanted to enable it out of the gate, and basically recall would take a screenshot of everything you do on your computer, like every 10 seconds or every couple of whatever timeline it was, which basically a lot of security people in the industry got up in arms around it and talking about it. But as you said, it was probably a different business group inside Microsoft that said this is a great idea, good design, good feature, and maybe not consulted the security side, right?
Yeah, or if they consult them, then the decisions come down to making money or being secure. In infrastructure companies, they're always going to lean that way. Yes, they're going to have a degree of security, but in this case, they had clearly two paths, and they chose the path to release. Yeah, so it was probably internally frustrating to the security people, but customers don't look at it two separate companies. They say
Right.
that's the company, and we've seen it before. We've seen it with Cisco, we've seen it with IBM. Seen it before with Microsoft. Any combined company like that, and it's also in the other way when security companies try to get an infrastructure, and it inevitably goes wrong because it's a different buying center, different priorities. Well, the buying centers might be converged. It's the priority sense, right? So what's your priority? Functionality or security?
Yeah, it's a tough one to deal with, I think, as an organization, because, like you say, I mean, they come out and they get, even recently with Microsoft, with the hacks that happened against Microsoft, they've come out and said we're going to tie um, pay to security. So executive pay to security. I don't know how that would work out, to be honest, Greg. I guess it's trying to say we're going to take security more important, make it more important in our decisions as a business, and everybody who is an executive needs to make sure that they follow that. Whether it happens or not, I don't know. I mean, whoever designed this recall feature, that executive's pay probably should get decreased because it really, is basically just a really bad designed product that that adversaries could take advantage of in
Right.
many cases.
And not knowing the specifics of the individuals or their comp, in my experience, that the incentives for going to market to getting things released will always exceed monetarily any penalty you're going to get for security. And I guarantee that whatever, pick any company, don't pick, not just Microsoft in this case, any sort of security penalty that they're given will always be magnitude smaller than any upside for
Right.
getting things to market, having a new release, a new feature that like Recall had, for example, with AI sprinkled all over it, a lot of executive buy-in, heavy corporate push across a company. Yeah, that's, we've seen this before and we'll see it again because of those incentives aren't matched. So,
And that kind of ties into a conversation I had. I was at InfoSec Europe last week in London, and I had a dinner with a bunch of CISOs. And one of the areas we discussed was a lot of times, CISOs are in a cost center, right? It's security is a
yeah,
cost center typically.
always
They're
is.
always having to go and ask for money, and it's like, and they struggle a lot with how to turn cybersecurity into potentially a profit center for a business. Do you think that's even possible?
That's one of those other laws of physics that security, rarely has a true ROI. And yes, there's cases where you can find some of it, but in effect, it's like insurance. It is a cost. And yes, insurance and security are very important to the customer experience. They're important to a lot of things, but it's not a binary thing. You're not adding sort of, power, no power. It's going to be how much of that spice are we putting in? And that's the reality of it. It's a cost center, how much of a cost and how much impact it can have. But it's very difficult to have unless you're a security company. It's not going to have that direct correlation, and that's what we wrestle with, and that's inevitable. It's much like a lot of things in life, like health insurance. It's,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a tough metric to tie to. The healthier I am, the more profitable I can be.
Well,
To
and
that.
even the survey we did with CISOs recently, where we asked them, what would it take to get you to spend more money on security? Because a lot of them are actually lowering their budgets these days or keeping them flat. They said that a breach. That the only reason they're going to increase is if a breach happens. So until then, they're
Right.
going to keep everything status quo, so to speak, right?
Right, right. And despite our best intentions and a lot of good talk, that's unfortunately the reality for many companies. Now, there are responsible companies who, especially in the banking world, we see they have great budgets. They do great things. Typically, the highest percentage spend on security, quite often double the industry average and things like that, or sometimes triple. Um, but if you have issues, like if you're, for example, AI is a great one, right? Need more money for AI security. If you go to the board now and ask them, boards are going to cough that up. So I
Right.
also think there's a bit of middleman being played in the security budgets that, yes, you can always have too much. You end up with shelfware and things like that. But I think that the asks are not happening proactively right now. And the boards I talk to, they're really happy to cough up money right now. As long as they have a good reason for it. So if they're asked, hey, we have AI, we need AI security, they're gonna give you money as long as you can explain what it's going to be for. So yeah,
Right, right, and that's I think one of the things that CISOs, if they truly understand how to deliver that to the board, basically, how can I tie it to a cyber risk or it's going to benefit the business, then they'll get the money, right? And like you said, though, AI, you say anything AI right now, it seems like, well, just write a check, right?
yeah, because of the fear of it. So and again, there's always two types of organizations and two types of CISOs as well: the proactive, the lean forward, and the lean back or the reactive. And it's not that they're good or bad people. It's often the state the organization is and how they do technology. But the proactive ones, they're planning budgets ahead of time. They're getting that money to implement these safeguards they need. And the reactive ones, like you say, are typically unfortunately they need a breach or something really bad to happen before that, or the
Yes.
CISO has to leave to go somewhere else because it's untenable for them.
Right, right. So back to this idea of secure by design, Greg, when we talk about, you have companies that are infrastructure plus security and they always have their button heads all the time. But what do you think in terms of recommendations you would give to a business today if they wanted to be a little more proactive, or how would they go overcome those battles between security and the business?
I think that consumers of security are better at that than the actual companies delivering the two services. So now we've seen, for example, firewall is a great one where it used to be part of the CISO organization quite often, and small organizations still is, but in general, it's going to be part of the ops groups. So that blending of security and operations is there, and the CISO is just checking that the work is done quite often, one removed even. So that I think is not difficult in organizations, but if they are challenged with it, like we've seen, where these choices are made, all you can do is go on the record and try to influence and try to find champions. And that's when CISO world becomes not security knowledge or technology knowledge. It becomes how you operate as a leader and as a manager in that company. So yes, it's an uphill fight. It is a thankless job, but that's the job that has to be done. You have to, pick your battles, fight them, and document, but not just for the sake of it, but to let people know what's at stake. You got to pick your battles. Of course, you can't fight it on every small thing, but on the big ones, if it's a big business killer or a big business herder, just say, hey, this is bad.
Right. Right. Well, and I think, one of the things that is interesting in our time right now we're seeing is social media does appear to be influencing some of the decisions because there is backlash now, and there's so many people on social media these days that you could alienate a lot of your base if you don't follow through with some of this, because the reach with some of these folks have is pretty extensive. And so I do like the idea that there is a way to call out companies these days for bad practices. And hopefully that makes some changes inside that business to be a little bit more aligned with security practices versus, like you said, I mean, it's not always the almighty dollar, hopefully moving forward, and that companies do agree that there is some security needed. So, part of this pledge with the CISA, with the Secure by Design pledge, is kind of that, moving that direction. So I'm hopeful that we can move that way. But like you said, at the end of the day, stock price matters, revenue matters, profit matters, and that tends to that overlooks a lot of the security challenges.
Yeah, I think unfortunately for the companies that make infrastructure and security together, the calculus hasn't changed, so the behavior won't change. But I think for companies who make general product, like just in the general business, who don't sell security products, but they want their stuff to be secure, I think that's where the real value is. So the other guys, they're going to that dog will keep biting that postman. But in the case of the other companies, I think you're absolutely right that there's a higher standard they're being held to now, even in the case where there's so many breaches and so much going on, that the ones that are where there's been an opportunity to, especially to make it right, and they haven't, or they've missed the big one, that's where they're going to get held up, and I think they should be. Whereas, somebody tries to do the right things, they get breached, they're just the target of the day for that state-sponsored actor. Yeah, that happens, and that's, probably a lot of it, but where the ones where there is, something they should have done and they didn't, there's a much bigger, I think, bullhorn about that now, and it should be.
Yeah. So maybe the idea is maybe not get security done by your infrastructure vendor. Don't buy this both from the same vendor, and maybe look at a third party option out there.
Just acknowledge that there's a dynamic at play that's not in security's favor when you do that. And if you do it with your eyes open, that's cool. But if you're doing it expecting that, there's a tale being told, which is not true. And if you look at history and the behavior that's, the incentives are mismatched. One thing you brought up, which is really interesting, was about the sort of holding people up to too high a standard, which is not what we're talking about in that case. But you can never trip in security, and that's somebody brought that up, a colleague of ours today, and I thought that was interesting and worth thinking about. Is you can never make a mistake in security, and that's the opposite end of this, which is the unfair part of the social sort of microscope that goes on it. But that's a different problem than you light your own house on fire and then claim it was a state-sponsored actor, and gee, aren't they clever? They're very advanced threats.
It was the intern down the hall, right?
Yeah. Or you did a really terrible product, or you were told, don't do that. Like, don't mix the gasoline and the matches in the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this has been a good discussion, Greg. Any final thoughts on your end?
Despite history teaches us great things, and again, these incentives that we've been talking about, I think it's when you look at the business of security, you've got to look at, what's behind it. And certainly when we've seen some acquisitions lately happening in the business of security, we see it being done for primarily investor reasons. So once again, ask the question to yourself and say, does this make sense to me? Like we saw one acquisition happen this weekend where they bought a company and they already make a product and they haven't explained why they're doing that. Well, why would they be doing that? Well, probably investor reasons, just keeping themselves in the investor press. So just, follow the money why some of these decisions are being made in business. And even if you're an internal CISO, follow the money quite often. Like, what are the incentives in your own organization? And why are decisions being made, or why did we do that thing insecurely, or what's that motivation? And that can be part of your understanding for it and help to remedy it as well.
Yeah, things get complicated quickly, and it can be pretty messy. But there are ways forward. So great discussion, Greg. I appreciate it. And everybody, thanks for joining us on episode 32 of Trend Talks BizSec. Greg and I will be back in 2 weeks to talk about another topic. And again, in the comments section, if you want to give us a comment on what topics you'd like us to take on in the future, we'd love to hear it. Give us a like. We'd love that too. So everybody have a great day and stay safe out there. And we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Hey, thanks. Thanks, John. The next episode, I want to hear about London. So
Excellent.
Hey.